Hi, everyone, and welcome to another very special edition of the Edward Jones Chatting Cage. I am JB, but more importantly, in the cage taking his cuts today, legendary broadcaster, telecaster, radio announcer. You know him, Ford C. Frick Award winner as well, Jon Miller. Jon, thanks for being with us. It's such a pleasure.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I'm ready to go.
All right, we know that
firing him in there.
He is ready. Fans, I know you're getting your webcams fired up to fire the questions in so he can take his hacks. I'm going to go to Twitter first because there's been a steady stream of questions already, so we'll lead with that. And it's tough to whittle it down to the one to open with, Jon, but I'm going to go with this one from Mikey Luke 72. When you're not working yourself, which other broadcasters do you actually enjoy listening to as well?
Well, now with the XM radio, I am able to hear a lot of other broadcasters because out on the West Coast, other than maybe the Oakland Athletics games from across the bay, it's hard to hear all the games. Back here in the East, I would get in my car when I did the Baltimore games and the Boston games and drive home, and there'd be another 10 or 11 games I could pick up from all the different cities, so many cities in close proximity. But anytime I have a chance to hear Vin Scully, that is great, and I feel like I always learn something about the business. And really, I think it might be news to people back in this part of the country, but I think Ken Korak and his partner Vince Cotroneo, who do the Oakland Athletics radio broadcasts, outstanding. And I think Ken Korak is one of the best in the business and is probably going to win that Ford C. Frick Award one day soon.
Well, that is good. There's no doubt that is a recommendation we can all take to heart then. And a fan of Vince Scully, I think we all share that as well. This is the Edward Jones Chatting Cage. Fans are the engine. We have one with us now. What is your name, where you're from, and what is your question for Jon?
Hi, Jon. My name is Paul. I'm from Boca Raton, Florida. And I was just wondering, what's your philosophy in terms of when you're calling no-hitters in perfect games? Do you believe in the jinx? Do you go ahead and say no-hitter when it's going on? What's your philosophy on that?
My philosophy is that we're broadcasting for the fan. We're trying to provide the service for the fan. People are tuning in and out all through the game. We'd like to believe, as the broadcasters, that everybody has tuned in right at the beginning of the game and they've been listening all the way through, but we know that that's just not the case. At any given moment, a majority of the audience may have just tuned in within the last minute or so. So we're always trying to keep the people up to date what the score is and what's been happening in the game. We're trying to recap and give each player's night as he comes to the plate and continually recap how the score got to be the way that it is. So that means if there's a no-hitter, you've got to say it. Let's, for instance, Matt Cain had a perfect game a couple of years back, and the Giants won that game 10-0, and it was 10-0 in about the fifth inning. Can you imagine somebody tuning into that game and it's the sixth or seventh inning and he's got a perfect game? We're not mentioning it because we're a little superstitious. And the people say, oh, it's 10-0, it's a blowout. They got this one. And then they just tune us out and go to do something else. No, we have to tell them exactly what's going on and the excitement of it. And plus, I don't get the whole superstition anyway. Can I mention in some other ballpark, let's say I'm doing a Giants game with the Dodgers, can I mention that the Mets have a no-hitter going at Citi Field in the fifth inning or the sixth or the seventh? Or would I be jinxing that? Can I mention if the other team, the guy from the other team has a no-hitter against the Giants? Can I mention that? Or should I mention that, hoping that the Giants will break it up? I don't exactly get. Can anybody in the stadium mention it, or should nobody at the stadium mention it? So I think that's a superstition from the dugout, and you could have a rationale for that, hey, he's in a zone. We don't want to do anything to take him out of that. We're not going to mention it. We're not going to talk to him about it. But even then, Tim Lincecum has pitched a no-hitter in each of the last 2 years. I mentioned it several times on the broadcast. And Tim Lincecum was talking to all of his teammates, and he said afterward, well, yeah, I like to talk to everybody because otherwise it seems odd, and it kind of makes me more tense that everybody's acting so much differently than usual. So he himself was not superstitious about it in any way, and that's the way I feel. I just don't think there's anything to be superstitious about. We have no effect on it.
That is, folks, I hope you're taking notes, because when Jon Miller talks about broadcasting, you should write a few things down. It's like a clinic here in the cage. We got another fan with us. What's your name, where you're from, and what is your question for Jon?
Hi, I'm Robert, and I'm from Massachusetts. What team did you like when you were a kid?
Well, I grew up in the San Francisco area, and the San Francisco Giants were my team. I'm very fortunate that I got to grow up and eventually come back to San Francisco and be a broadcaster for the Giants. That would have been my dream when I was a little kid. I saw my first game at Candlestick Park, the old home of the Giants, in 1962 when I was 10 years old. And they beat the Dodgers. It was a Giants-Dodgers game in mid-April, very early in the season. And they beat the Dodgers 19-8. And I always remembered that game, and I always wondered, what if they'd lost to the Dodgers 8-0? Would I have even remained a big fan? Because everything went well. Willie Mays hit a home run, my all-time idol. Felipe Alou hit a home run. Jimmy Davenport. Billy O'Dell pitched a complete game 15-hitter for the Giants that night in their 19-8 win. So I was always a Giants fan, but I did broadcast Boston Red Sox games in 1980, 81, 82. And I really found that I cared deeply about the Red Sox while I was there, since they were paying me a lot more money than the Giants were at that time. So, and when you have a chance to go to Fenway Park every day, then you're a lucky man. So those weren't particularly great years for the Red Sox, but it was right near the end of Yastrzemski's time in Boston, one of the all-time greats and a Hall of Famer. And I was also there for the last year of Carlton Fisk, Fred Lynn, Rick Burleson, who were key members of some great and powerful Red Sox lineups from the mid-'70s on through 1980. So that was exciting just to see all those guys, because they had great sluggers in that lineup in those days.
We bring in another fan into the Edward Jones chatting cage, and we'll see what this question is. Where from? What's your question for John?
Hey, John, I'm Troy from Baltimore. If you had to give advice to any future sports broadcaster, what would it be?
I think the best advice for any sports broadcaster who is not planning on playing in the major leagues, I think that's the best way to become a baseball broadcaster, is to play in the major leagues. You have name recognition, you have credibility for knowing the game, and you have a much better chance of being hired to do the games. If you aren't a ball player, if you're not going to be a big league ball player and you're going to do it the way I did it, I think it's very important to have a great grasp of the language, because that is the tool that you have to work with when you broadcast the game. So you look at Vin Scully, he studied Latin in school. He had sort of a classical education. My partner with the Giants, Dave Fleming, who is sort of in the Vin Scully mold in terms of his background, his education, he studied Latin in high school, and then he went to Stanford, and he was a classics major. He read Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey in ancient Greek. Although I did tell him when we hired him, says, Dave, you're a little bit overqualified for this line of work, sorry to say. but he has a great facility with the language, and those are the tools that you use. So I think if you become a fan of literature, read books, read histories, where you get a feel for how the language is used, improve your vocabulary. Bill King, a great broadcaster who I think belongs in the Hall of Fame as a Ford C. Frick winner. The late Bill King was with the Oakland Athletics. He used to carry a thesaurus and a dictionary with him on the road, and he was always studying the language. He was always reading great literature, and then he would look up words, and he would get the definition, and then he would endeavor to use whatever new words he'd learned that day in that night's broadcast, and therefore to build up his vocabulary, because that's what we have to offer. And obviously you have to be a big fan of the sport that you're covering. If you're not a big fan of baseball, I don't think you can be a strong baseball broadcaster. That is first and foremost. You have to love the game. You have to have grown up with the game. You have to know the history of the game. So there's a lot that goes into it, but I think a good fundamental grounding in the language is essential.
All right, a great thanks to Jon Miller. That wraps up this round of the Edward Jones Chatting Cage.